Welcome, friends, to session 5 of 6 sessions on the topic of prayer. For this week, we're going to be going into some murky territory, talking about some of the problems we have in prayer. But before I get into any introductory comments about that, I left you with some, I don't know, I call it homework, but just some reflection work over the last week. And I wanted to know if there'd been anything that you discovered as you attempted, with intention to try something new to stimulate your prayer life this past week, whatever it was, doesn't even matter. So I'd love to hear from any of you who did try something new or discovered something that just sort of struck you this week. So just any reflections on that? Bonnie and then Barb.
Well, as you know, I requested that we do a study on prayer because I had kind of gotten to the point that, does it really make any difference if we pray or if we don't pray? I mean, I just, if you pray for somebody to get well and they get well, but they've gotten well anyway, if they don't get well, it's because you didn't pray enough. I was just sort of like, what's the point? So I really kind of haven't been praying very, very much, to be honest. I might pray for like, oh, I can't find that. God, will you help me find it? I found it. Thanks, God. And that's kind of been what my prayer life has been like. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, I woke up in the middle of it. I've been thinking a lot about my own mortality because we've had several friends die in the last few weeks. And it's like, you ain't going to live forever. And so I've been thinking about that a lot. And I sort of woke up in the middle of the night and a few nights back, and I started thinking about hymns. And so instead of praying, I have been deciding to read a hymn or a couple of hymns. And it's helped me. I mean, I went back to old hymns, some that were sung by Elvis Presley even, but, Precious Lord, Take My Hand and Peace in the Valley, and some of these old hymns. But when you read the lyrics and you really look at the words, they're really comforting. They really give me inspiration. It is well with my soul, so on and so. So that's what I've been doing. I haven't been formally praying, but I've been reading some of these hymns, and it's really, they're there for a reason, I guess.
Thank you for those just so relatable comments. And then what an awesome practice. And it's funny you bring that up, because at the ART service I did this past Sunday, so right after church, basically, we always sing some of the classic hymns. And there was something about when we sang His Eye is on the Sparrow this week that just really struck me. And it really felt, there was just something that brought a tear to my eye. And I'm not really sure what it was, but I think it was all about kind of how sometimes the songs and the poetry of the songs just speaks to our lives in ways that always have been a prayer. Maybe we think of it that way as something that's notable or different, but the truth is that's what music always has been. And that's a very powerful and wonderful opener for a prayer life, especially when, it feels maybe a little arid right now. In a prayer life. I get it. Find the words that do stimulate the water for the soul, the parched soil, and see what rises. So thank you, Bonnie. That's beautiful.
Yeah. I'll just say his eye is on the sparrow is also one of the hymns that I read this week.
Yeah, it's something about that one. Thank you. Barb Tellman.
Well, I don't have anything nearly as wonderful as that, but I had all sorts of good intentions. And the first intention I had was that I would get up at dawn and walk in my yard by myself. Well, it was really, really cold at dawn, so that went by the wayside. So then I said, well, I'll wait until the furnace comes on at about 6 o'clock in the morning, and I'll get up and I'll do my meditation then. And that lasted for about 3 days. And then I overslept. So I had good intentions, but as it turns out, I went back to my normal meditation time, which is right after breakfast. And I was successful in meditating every day of the week, which is really strange for me. So I think because you suggested this and you wanted us to try something else, it just made me more aware, and thank you for that.
I really appreciate that. Just that sometimes it does take the trying of something new and maybe not having it take, hold in us to really devote ourselves maybe with a different approach to some of our tried and true practices. So if that's where the opening was, that's a beautiful one, because to me, whatever gets you kind of into that zone of connection of what works for you, that's the point. So thank you, Barbara. Yeah, follow up.
Can I just mention one thing? I found a book of Psalms called Psalms, and I can't remember, it's by Nan Merrill. I don't know if any of you are Psalms for Praying. It's called Psalms for Praying by Nan Merrill.
Yeah, that sounds right.
I read one of those every day, and that is, I think they're the most beautiful paraphrase of the Psalms I have ever found.
Yeah, it sort of picks up on what Bonnie was saying. I think using music or hymns or poetry to spark us is often very powerful. Thank you. I saw Jane, Jane Worst.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, like Bonnie, I chose music, and it came to me right away that afternoon, because so many scriptures talk about singing and praising God. I thought music, and I chose to get out my old CDs of praise music, which I listened to so constantly in the 90s probably. And our church sang praise music. We had Joyful Noise, little choir that sang praise music. So I tried to listen to my CDs, and I want those words and those melodies to become alive in me again. They used to be really important to me, and I've forgotten lyrics, I've forgotten melodies, and I'm just going to keep playing them. And so hopefully those melodies and words will just pop up spontaneously for me throughout the day at different times, because I love praise music.
Yeah, I think that's a wonderful practice. It's kind of like revisit some of those lifelines that had been, maybe left a little buried for a while, and see what comes up. And again, that's three now that pertain to, music or the poetry connected to music. It's a potent prayer practice for sure. Thank you, Marilyn, and then Patty.
I have been having a lot of trouble sleeping, and I've tried a number of different things. I've tried sort of more traditional kind of praying, and so it just felt like nothing's worked. And I think it's partly because the news has just been getting to me. And there are some ways in which I wish I could just leave it off, but somehow I can't. I want to know what's going on, but it can be troubling.
I couldn't get in on your computer.
Pardon?
That's Horty's, sorry.
Okay. So I thought I came across a recommendation for mindfulness as a way to just relax and bring on sleep. And then I came across the idea of breath mindfulness, where when I breathe in, I think when I breathe in and out, I do that putting numbers to it until I get up to the number 10. And then I start over again. And the first night I really tried it. Oh, it absolutely worked beautifully. I went to sleep quite quickly. And then every time I woke up in the night, I'd do it and I'd go right back to sleep. Well, last night it didn't work at all. So anyway, I'm glad I tried it, but obviously it's not the final answer, or not the only answer.
Right. That's a great way of saying it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's one of the things we'll be talking about today is how practices, there may not be one absolute fail-safe, tried and true, singular pathway here. But yeah, it's important to try and to open ourselves to new possibilities. And even if they're just subtly new or just ticking up something that we used to do or didn't, it's simple ideas like counting, but to do it in a context of prayer, that might break things open for us. Absolutely. Thank you, Bon. Thank you,
Can
Marilyn.
I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
The doctor has said to me that despite what I read, despite what I hear, I just may not need as much sleep as the recommendation or the it can give you heart trouble apparently and all sorts of things if you don't get enough sleep. But I'm just fine during the day.
Yeah.
Nobody would know that I hadn't. In fact, I forget.
And I think that's a really important thing. We often make pathologies out of these things, and it just might be that, hey, this is where we are. And so to approach it with that attitude, that perspective, kind of can free you from some of the worry about it, because there's maybe nothing wrong with you at all. But we often do that, right? When we're like, oh, I haven't slept. And I've often gone through that because I'm about a 5 to 6 hour a night sleeper. And that's, I want to get more at times, or the idea, but the reality is I function very well with less sleep. Yes. So, and so anyway, you can make yourself sick as well by worrying about it or, doing what your doctor just said. So yeah, it's worthy of reflection. Thank you. Patty.
So I have an altar in my house, and the house was a church at one time. It was the first church in Camino. And it exudes a lot of churchness all the time. The altar is a place that I go to every day, all the time. And I just pause there. But this week, one of the things I used too was music. And we've been away from choir for a while, and I really missed it. And one of the songs we're learning is How Can I Keep From Praying? So I sang that a lot.
Yeah.
And I love the challenge of it, because I don't get to sing the soprano part. I get to sing the alto part, which is a different part. And it's a part that wakes me up to the words, because I have to really work on singing it a different way than I'm inclined to.
Oh, yeah.
And it's a beautiful song. It's a really beautiful song. And that's what I used. And it was really, it was just in the moment kind of feelings. There's a lot going on. We have 2 friends who are in really critical health problems, uterine cancer, and an immune compromised person who has a virus and other things too. And so just pausing several times in that room, and at the altar, I have all the loved ones that I've lost on that altar. And I have a cross from about 1700 that's French. And they're just symbols. They're symbols, but they're meaningful symbols. I have a picture of an old tapestry of the Last Supper, a picture, a kind of iconic picture of Mary. It's really a beautiful space to me, and it's quiet. So to be able to go there every day, I go there every morning, but to go there during the day calms me down when I'm really troubled. So, and I don't even have to talk. I just go there.
Yeah. No, I feel that in a space like what you have, you can almost tap into the DNA of ancestors or of the faith who have been in that space, giving of their own hearts and joys and sorrows and life. And to tap into that doesn't make it go away, but it can make space. It can kind of, like you were describing, you kind of can just go there and release some of it onto the altar and allow yourself to not have to carry it all the time. And that can be liberating. But what a wonderful opportunity. And I look forward to hearing that song too. How Can I Keep From Praying? I love that.
Yeah,
Thank you. Anyone else want to share something? Horty?
Am I unmuted now? I'm sorry. Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. I think I talked last week about sort of what Marilyn was talking about, praying with the breath, the in and the out. And having done that rather, I would say formally or routinely with a Buddhist sitting group. And since I've not been sitting with them, I haven't done it as routinely. But it's something that I recall as having brought me a great deal of peace. And I had some very troubling days this week. It was very disturbing to me. I was ill, which I don't like. Obviously, I'm better, thank you. And I just stayed with the breath in prayer. And I can't say there were particular words, but my intention was prayerful. And I was deeply comforted. And things really transitioned, again, very deeply. So that was, it was wonderful. There was a familiarity and a newness at the same time. And then Bob and I decided that we would, and we decided that we couldn't make a formal exact time, but sometime before dinner, right around the dinner time, but before dinner, that we would join together and pray briefly. And I love worshiping with Bob every week, and I just loved renewing that contact of our intention again on a daily basis. So it was very, very sweet and very meaningful.
Yeah, that's a powerful one and precious too. Just really important to be in each other's presence, to sort of see each other, to really look at each other as you're lifting a prayer like that. So intimate and just a beautiful expression of love and worship. And also, as you were saying, kind of when you're brought low and you're sick, sometimes it's those simple tried and true practices that you go back to that really can provide just a new, just some sort of new insight, just new opening in your prayers, especially when you're not feeling your best. So we're glad you are feeling better.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I do. I feel much better. Thank you. Thank you. And so on so many levels, marvelously. I found during those days, I didn't have any request. It's like God made me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
It was just the very simple prayer of, oh my God. That's all I wanted to do. I didn't have the energy or the strength or the intention to ask for anything.
Yeah.
Just to be present with my God.
Amen. Thank you. Yes, Susan.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'll just use this. I like to play hymns on the piano, and lots of hymns that we haven't done in church, but have lots of wonderful words and melodies that are just great to hear and to play. And so that's one thing that I like to do. And then we as a family have always done family devotions every day. And when our kids were little, we would do books that they could understand with, pictures and whatever, and Bible stories and such. And everybody would say a prayer, even the kids. And so we've always done that. And so that I think that's an important thing for me. And then last week, Barbara was mentioning about she had a word, and I used to do Transcendental Meditation. I haven't done it for a while. And so I started doing it again. And so those are just some of the things that I like to do.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah, if there's something, to listen to music, to play it is just another whole realm of participation in the way that the song and the poetry of it can move through us. So yeah, it's a powerful expression. And I love I love that idea too of the meditative word. That's such a nice, I love those focal point type prayers, especially when I'm feeling frenzied. Kind of really brings me back into a place of centeredness. Thank you, Susan. Birdie, I see you. Yeah.
Yeah, Margaret's trying to get logged in, and even the Pastor Dan isn't working for them.
Huh.
They're wondering what was the incorrect password, if that might work.
The correct one is Pastor Dan, all just
Yeah.
one word. So tell her to try it again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
If they had tried it previous to us starting, that's the issue.
Well, no,
that's how you all got in.
yeah, but she just tried it a second ago.
Huh. Yeah, it's all one word, all lowercase.
Yeah, are you in the lowercase? Or you didn't hit?
I just clicked on the link that was sent out in the email.
Yeah, you could do that too. Now that the password's right. But yeah, I don't want to sort of interrupt the class either. Unfortunately, if you could help her, that'd be great. I want her to get in, but it's a little hard at this stage. But yeah, it should be it will be that password. And if anyone can sort of send that to her, that she could click on it, that'd be great. I appreciate that. But let's kind of thank you for all those beautiful reflections. You know, for me, one of the things I got to do is Sunday evening. I got to go look at the stars with a woman who we've just gotten to know, who's been coming to church. Her name is Marcia, but she's an amateur astronomer. And she has these large telescopes. I think I mentioned that we got to see Jupiter. We've seen Saturn, you know, just really cool with the boys. And each one of those, to look at something like that is, for the most of my reality is just something that's up there twinkling, but I don't really take note of. But then to see it like that, we were talking about how just seeing the stars and the planets is a prayer. It's a recognition of the beauty and the life that is outside of our little realm, in the way that to listen to Carl Sagan talk about the universe was a prayer, because he could speak about it in such really poetic theological terms, even as a scientist. You know, just such a beautiful, mystifying reality to be in the presence of that, or have the ability to look up and see. And that's why I'm so fascinated with this James Webb Space Telescope. I'm so excited to see what it will show us, because it really is opening a whole new cosmology, a whole new way of understanding our place in the universe, and to give us more ways to talk about it. So anyway, thank you all for those that entry into today's discussion. You know, so the topic of problems in prayer is one that most of us encounter. I think, Bonnie, in your opening comments, you named it beautifully, and like I said, so relatably, that one way or another, and maybe quickly and maybe often, we will bump into this question about what the heck is prayer for? What is it doing? Why am I doing this? Where are you, God? And the poignancy of reading the Psalms, and the whole idea of how many of them say, "How long, God, before you listen to me, see me, know me, hear me, do something?" All of that intensity is something a lot of us can relate to, and maybe right now that we do that. And so today we're going to be talking about some of those problems, and specifically the biggest problem, as I was sort of thinking about this and looking at it, the biggest problem we're going to talk about today is the idea of unanswered prayer. You know, not so much the problems of how do we pray. We sort of talked about that last week, but, you know, the challenges that, you know, whether it's just the existential challenge of feeling alone in the universe, in our lives, even in our prayer, and what that does, what it can mean, and to kind of look at it with a little bit more of a broader perspective, to see, you know, just to not maybe judge it as we maybe have some of us in our lives and in our experience, but to just examine it. What does it mean, you know, to us in our prayer lives? How does it impact us, this whole thing about unanswered prayer? You know, there's been a lot of reflection throughout history theology and more than theology. It's not just within religion, but this idea of what is it about unanswered prayer? Why does unanswered prayer happen? And many have reflected on all sorts of ideas. Okay. Well, maybe it's partly the fault of the one doing the praying. Maybe there's something that some have brought that up, and maybe you've heard that in your life. Maybe there's some will say, well, it's because God has such a profound respect for human freedom and is not going to coerce nature in those ways, like the supernatural ways that God is just resolved to stay on some way, some measure of distance. Welcome, Margaret. I see you. Glad you made it. So the others have said there's a dark power, in the world that's contending with God's power, and that's what we face when our prayers are not being answered. That's another thing. Others have said, rightly so, I think, we live in a planet that's marred by disease and violence and propensity towards accidents and chaos. That it's hard for prayers to be answered, right? Heck, go watch the movie Bruce Almighty with Jim Carrey. And it's a very lighthearted movie, but it's got some pretty poignant reflections on the idea that what if God did answer every prayer? Even in the Bible, God doesn't answer every prayer. And thank goodness, right? Because it's this idea that sometimes the things we pray for are not really the things that we need or that will serve us ultimately. These are big topics, obviously, but there's a measure of truth in a lot of those, if not all of those reflections on, kind of addressing unanswered prayer and maybe the whys of it, but they're all leaving us wanting. I don't think any one of them covers it all. There's always examples we can think of or poignancy in our lives that say, no, that's not enough. And the truth is there is no formula. There's no singular way, as we were talking about just with your initial examples, that you shared. There's no singular way that's always going to get us into that A, zone of feeling like we're connected to our prayer, and B, getting the results that we're praying for, the desired things. We don't just sit down, get our lives right, say the right words, and then boom. God is not a vending machine, and prayer is not a coin. So that's the reality. And because if it was true, then we wouldn't have had those wonderful stories like Job, about Job. Job would have just prayed and it would have gone away. Paul and his the thorn in his side that he talked about many times, would have prayed and that's just gone. Jesus, for that matter, wouldn't have had to experience Golgotha if it was just that straightforward. So we know this. And what we're exploring today is, between this poignant question that we all ask at times, this idea of, does prayer do anything? Is there any actual impact of prayer? And between that bigger question and the more specific question of, well, will God respond and answer my specific prayer about the child that I love or the brokenness that I see in my world or in my family? There's a difference. There's a mystery in between those two questions. And I will start by saying there may well not be a logical explanation that we can come to. And in fact, I could say that there's not a logical way that we can appreciate this. And where we may be left at some point is that we might need to be able to throw our lot in faith with a God who has not yet fully fulfilled the promises that good will overcome evil or that justice will prevail in the end. It's like, Martin Luther King and that bending of the arc. The arc hasn't maybe reached the destination yet. And so there may well be points in our lives and our prayer life that we need to be able to say, all right, even though I'm not feeling it, I feel distant, even though I'm not getting the results that I'm longing for, all of that, I still throw my lot in with you, God, and trust. Now, some people may look at that as the ultimate act of folly to do that, the ultimate act of rationalization, and just convincing yourself. But it might just be the ultimate act of faith. So that's sort of the introductory comments. That's kind of the that gives us some of the parameters, I think, in this big conversation. Again, to bring up this topic is always kind of like, well, we're going to choose some paths. We're not going to be able to cover everything. We'll choose some paths, and we hope that they will lead us to fruitful places. And I trust they will. So any initial comments or thoughts on some of those opening remarks? Patty?
One of the things that I think about is that everything that I do is very constructed by my experience and therefore limited. And when I think about God, and I don't know, I think that God is not like me, then I have to say, perhaps God's idea of goodness and evil is not like mine. And I'm supposed to learn something that I haven't learned yet. I mean, what morality is, what goodness is, and how it happens. I mean, my life is very brief, and God has been around a long time. And the arc of creating a beloved community may take a lot longer than I can tolerate.
Yeah.
And I constantly, I mean, if what I receive in prayer is silence, that used to tick me off. But now it's just, okay, what am I supposed to learn? You know, what does the silence, there's never not an answer. The silence is an answer.
Yes.
And the other thing I think about is communion, because one of the things Christ said in one of the books is, do this in remembrance of me. And remembrance is an interesting word. I don't know what it is in Aramaic or Hebrew, but if you think of something being remembered, recreated, to me, that's kind of the essence of what I'm called to do, is to recreate or to notice the recreation that God is making in all of us.
Amen.
And that's what I feel, that I can't possibly understand it all, but I feel it's happening. I can feel it more than I can think it. And I'm trusting it.
Yes.
So.
Thank you. Beautiful, beautiful reflection. I find myself often doing symbolically when I break the bread in communion, when I say, and it depends on which story I'm using as my basis, but the breaking of the bread and the remembering, I will often reconstitute the loaf to illustrate the wholeness out of brokenness that we are called to, and that is within us. To create that beloved community that Jesus walked and shaped and loved into being. But yeah, that's what you just said is such a beautiful, just so many different things that I think we'll touch on as we continue to talk about this. But thank you, Patty. Any other reflections on those opening comments or on anything that's been said so far? Or if you hadn't had a chance to share your prayer practice, that's okay too. Marilyn? Oh, yeah, you're muted. There you go.
Thinking, reflecting while Patty was talking about what the things she was saying, how they relate to me, and the I feel like years that I have thought about and reflected these issues. And the one thing that has come to mean so much to me is the whole notion of metaphor. And thinking of metaphor as really a way of expressing truth that can even work better than being real explicit.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking, you know, when I get silence, or when I feel like I'm surrounded in silence, and that most happens to me at night, that I wonder what that's a metaphor for. If I'm going to think, what am I supposed to learn from this?
Yeah.
Anyway.
Teresa of Avila used to reflect on that. She recognized, I don't know if she spoke about it so scientifically, but she recognized that we are only capable of hearing a certain range, you know? So she said, you know, maybe the reality is that when we don't hear God in prayer, it's not God not speaking, it's us not being able to hear at that time. And how is it then that we can sort of channel those ways or use other senses to receive that response or that speaking. And I found that to be just, I don't know, I resonated with that, just appreciating her perspective from what, I don't remember what century, 14th century, way back, long time ago. But yeah, no, thank you for that. Jane?
Well, I think from my Christian upbringing, the church reinforced verses like seek and ye shall find, and ask and it shall be given, and the faith of a grain of a mustard seed, and all the things that we need to do and how God will answer. And it took me until my maybe 30s or something, 40s, when I did more reading and had more understanding of Eastern religions that directed, that kind of said, have a detachment from the outcome.
Yes.
And I kept trying to, that really spoke to me, that I can pray, but I have to have a detachment from the outcome. And I really,
so true.
What I really try to trust in with God in prayer is that he is with me, that he is abiding in me, that he is going to, I've said this before, but that he will sustain me, give me strength, give me clarity. It's not always the specific outcome, because when I get too attached to that, I am disappointed, I am hurt, I am sad because of death, because of, so it's helped me to try to remember to be detached from the outcome and just trust God's abiding with me.
Yes. So another beautiful comment, and it really segues well with what's been shared, just that idea of breaking open some of the assumptions that we have, and we don't even realize at times, the attachments that we have to outcome or to what certain things are. What is it? What do we mean when it says, or what did Jesus mean when he did say something like that? Ask and it shall be given to you. I mean, that is it literal? We assume such at different times in our lives, and then we move through these different possibilities of understanding. And one of the ways we talked about earlier, the first session, is learning how to pray as best we can from a God perspective, not from our own small perspective. So, and that was to say, to take those steps back, to broaden, to get a bird's eye view, and try to do that to help us appreciate what you just said and what Patty just said. Maybe our whole understanding of what goodness is, or evil is, or morality, or what the response sounds like or looks like, maybe we're too tied to some of those definitions, and it can very much lead us to places of hurt or disappointment, or brokenness in our faith. It can certainly lead there. So thank you. In fact, I think that's a good transition point to jump into our scriptures and continue with some of the questions that I have, because they really pick up on some of these things. If you don't mind, I don't want to cut anyone off though, before we do that. Okay, I'll need 4 readers today. They're all brief, but they're kind of our jumping off points to various parts of our upcoming discussion here. So could I just have 4 of you that I can see, that I can know to call on, since once I get to the shared screen, I won't be able to see your beautiful little faces. So don't all jump at once. Okay, Horty, number 1, Patty, number 2, Steve, number 3. Who's the last? Who's the last? Last shall be first. Bonnie wins. You get the cookie. All right. All right. Now, I don't necessarily remember what I just said, so hopefully you do as far as the numbers. I think it was Horty first, right? I hope that's what I said. Okay. Let's go here. There we go. So, Horty, would you please read Psalm 61 there, that portion?
Psalm 61, verses 1 through 4. Hear my cry, O God. Listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth I call to you, when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you are my refuge, a strong tower against the enemy. Let me abide in your tent forever, find refuge under the shelter of your wings.
Beautiful. Thank you. And number 2.
John 15, 5 through 8. I am the vine, and you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples.
There we go. Thank you. Number 3.
John 3, verses 21 through 24. Beloved, if our hearts do not condemn us, we have boldness before God, and we receive from him whatever we ask, because we obey his commandments and do what pleases him. And this is his commandment, that we should believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us. All who obey his commandments abide in him, and he abides in them. And by this, we know that he abides in us by the Spirit that he has given us.
Thank you, Steve. That's all 3 passages talking about abiding so far. Okay, and number 4.
Romans 8:18, 22 to 25. I consider that the sufferings of this present time are not worth comparing with the glory about to be revealed to us. We know that the whole creation has been groaning in labor pains until now. And not only the creation, but we ourselves, who have the first fruits of the Spirit, groan inwardly while we wait for adoption, the redemption of our bodies. For in hope we were saved. Now hope that is seen is not hope. For who hopes for what is seen? But if we hope for what we do not see, we wait for it with patience.
Okay, so some patience and persistence in that last one. Thank you. I'll bring those back up as necessary when our conversation kind of maybe draws on them more specifically. So those are some, again, we don't necessarily talk about them strictly in order, but keep some of that in mind, what we just read. I think the bits and pieces of that will come up. But I want to start with this. Just if you could assess on a scale of 1 to 10, how big a problem has unanswered prayer been for you in your relationship with God? And another way to think about it is, how has unanswered prayer affected you and, say, your loved ones, people you love? Or how has unanswered prayer affected your relationship with God? Bonnie?
Well, some of it, I was laughing to myself earlier when you were talking about things that we have prayed for and we look back on. And I guess the time, I don't know if I should get too personal, but I end up laughing at myself at some of the things that I prayed so hard for years ago. And it comes down to sort of God knows best. I'm glad those prayers weren't answered. But it might be a broken relationship. It might be a broken relationship with an old boyfriend, or several broken relationships with old boyfriends that I prayed so hard would work, but they didn't work. And I look back and I laugh and think, how silly of me to be praying instead of moving on or whatever, and looking at a bigger picture and praying for a bigger picture. And I look back now and I laugh at myself. And I'm really thankful that those prayers weren't answered in the way that I wanted them answered at the time. But I think aside from those specific issues, just the overall global idea of, especially if you're asking for something, that what are you asking for something specific, or are you asking more like what Patty said, or, are you asking for not a concrete answer maybe, but maybe just an opening up of yourself to better understanding and other possibilities.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the benefit of experience has really provided you the wisdom that is often the case. And that is, over time, you've looked back and seen how maybe an initial assessment about unanswered prayer would have driven some sort of a wedge between you and God. But now, thinking back on it, it seems that it's not necessarily, it maybe has drawn you closer in some ways, or it leaves room for that, because you've gained some perspective on what does it mean? What was I truly asking for, or did I even know? And thank God I didn't get what I asked for every time, that sort of thing. And that is something that comes with wisdom. But I would say what your answer just suggests is that there's a bit of a fluctuation that can happen on that sort of 1 to 10 scale or whatever of how we assess the way unanswered prayer may impact our relationship with God and our prayer life. It can create breaks, but it can also create the kind of breaks that open us up to a whole new perspective. And that's what you seem to name, at least in those situations. And I recognize that even in your own life, you've named things that really confound you and leave you sort of just unable to consider, what the point of it is, or to know, and, what does that do to prayer life? That can be silencing at times. So it's an open kind of wavering question, I suppose. Anyone else have any thoughts on that? How has unanswered prayer, affected your prayer life or your relationship with God? Marilyn?
I'm sorry, my hand's always in the air, but I just have so many ideas I want to share. What becomes clear to me as I think about your question is that unanswered prayer has led me to be much more patient and have quite a different kind of sense of time. Because so often, if I just wait, and sometimes that can be a couple of years, all of a sudden it will pop into me. Almost like my intuition, oh, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. And when I have done that, things have worked out beautifully. When I have pushed and I've decided I'm going to decide, I'm not hearing anything from God and I want to make this decision, lots of times that hasn't worked out so well.
Yeah. And then, thank you. And then we can even go to the point where it's like we can slam the door and say, well, God didn't answer that. And it's like, well, wait a second, maybe leaving ourselves open for that pleasant surprise down the road is part of the prayer practice too, to leave room for being surprised, even when we at some point feel that it's done. Heck, that's the Easter story itself. Really, that's what it's about. So prayer is another metaphor for living the resurrection story. But yes, thank you. And don't ever apologize for that hand that keeps lifting up. Okay. We love hearing all of you. Anyone else? Yes, Patty.
I think I resonate with what you're saying very much. And I think that one of the things that taught me most about this is when my first husband left after 20 years. And I was very attached to the idea that you don't get divorced. That was a sin. I was also very Catholic. And I was told by one of the priests that if there was divorce, it was my fault because a woman is supposed to hold things together. So, and I bought all that stuff for a long time. And one of the things that I think about often is that if John and I had gotten back together, I would have probably still thought divorce was the worst thing anybody could do. I would have been very judgmental. I would have probably not had a very good marriage because I wouldn't have had any faith in anybody. And I wouldn't have had the adventures that I had. Adventure of becoming the director of a medical program in an insurance company. I got chosen as one of the top 10 nurses in California by a Nurse Week magazine. I thought it was crazy. I called them up and said, how did you do that? And I said, you don't have any criteria. We're going to make criteria. Don't do that. You don't know me. And stuff like that never would have happened if I had stayed in that marriage, which was not happy for him. It was fine for me. I was on board with marriages forever. But then I got to marry a gorgeous psychologist who promptly died after 2.5 years. I went through lots of other adventures, going on the Buddhist pilgrimage to India, participating with Pachibeni. I mean, I was at the School of the Americas protesting. I was teaching peace classes. I never would have done that.
Yeah.
Never. And so how do we know what's what? How do I know what's what? I mean, when I think of my life, I think it's extraordinarily rich and crazy. It's still crazy, but it's rich. I mean, it's a life that one of my girlfriends said, you've had a lot of adventures, Patty, that most of us haven't had. And I never thought of that, but that's very true. And I've also had a lot of near misses. When I went to India, I almost died. And we were in Nepal, and we had Tamil tigers outside our windows with people with machine guns on their roof. We didn't know if we were going to get back into India. You know, if you think of that, if you think of things like that and think that happened to me, thank God I'm here. I mean, I could not be here. One of the nuns, the Buddhist nuns, her train was bombed on the way back from there. And I think we just can't know what's going to happen. Yeah. All we can do is be filled with wonder. But the thing that I feel most about it is that I never felt without God. I only thought that he didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah.
That's all.
Okay.
And I
so wonderful. Thank you. I think it's hard not to, when you're speaking these beautiful kind of ways about things about your life and the different undulations and movements. It's, I think we all know those in our own lives too. And to think back on where we've come versus where we started is often quite stunning and shocking and completely unpredictable. No, that's not always true. Some people marry their high school sweetheart and it's just like that sort of, classic, whatever that means, story. But for most of us, it's all about these wild swings that at time in the moment can feel like a failure or a suffering, a struggle. And there's an element of that, but that's what birth is like. There's often struggle and blood and it's difficult for everyone involved. And yet we arrive at these new places of utter transformation, and it's messy and yet it's beautiful. And it's so amazing to see, how our whole perspective can shift. When we're in it, we feel one thing and we sense God being there or not. And then sometime later, so often that assessment is wholly different. And that might mean that over time we forget. I don't know that that's what it is. That's part of it maybe, but I just think that over time we gain wisdom and perspective, and it opens us up to a different appreciation of these movements. And maybe the only response is to say thank you, as you did, just thank you, because I couldn't have predicted this. And wow, what a ride. What a ride. A lot of us in our prayers, and some of it's taught that we're taught this way, and it gets sort of backed up in the way we do prayers in church at times, but we pray as if we're in problem solving mode, as if we treat God like a sort of a one who can solve the problems of our lives, as if life in that moment is a problem, that approach, as opposed to where some reflective, mystics, theologians will say, well, what if it's not about a problem to be solved, but a work to be created, a work in progress to be shaped? And I just wanted to ask you, what would happen, or what, even as you think about that, reflect on that, how does that change your attitude about prayer? If you look at your life and your prayers as less a problem to be solved and more something as a work in progress to be created. Let's see, even if just you have an initial feeling of when you hear that, feel free to reflect on that. I know it's not easy, and that's why I published the notes for later, because it's a lot to chew on, but Anything coming to your mind or your heart, Horty?
Part of one of the passages that was read today was really powerful for me, as this thought always is. And it was the idea of, as you abide in me, things may be answered, things may come to you. What does it mean to abide in God? What does it mean to abide with God? Get out of ourselves and try to pray with God, whatever that might mean, but not for my outcome, but to abide and then bear the fruit that comes from the closeness of the relationship that the word abide means.
Yes. Yeah, because to abide with something, at least in the metaphor of the vine, it means we're already connected. We're already a part of that source. It flows through us. So let's not pretend or approach that our problems are separate from either God or from anyone else, for that matter. I love your language of get outside of ourselves. That's not easy to do. And maybe it's impossible. But I don't know that I agree with what I just said. I think it's something that's a practice. And it's reinforced to stay self-centered in our society, and in the prayer practices that Jesus gives us, he's trying to reinforce that stepping outside, and it's like the wolf on our shoulder, which one, the wolf and the sheep, or the lamb, what's the metaphor, but which one will win? Whichever one we feed, whichever one we really sort of focus on. So that's beautiful. Thank you.
I don't know that we can ever get outside ourselves. We are manifest as we are.
Exactly. That's what I meant.
But when we intend to move away from a self-centric viewpoint to the best of our ability,
yes,
I think has, for me anyway, great merit in widening my focus rather than narrowing my focus.
Yes. And with a softness about that, the practice of that, not a finger wag about that. And it's like, oh, when we miss it, we're bad. But it's just that softness to say, keep going in that direction, keep honing, shape it, because that's what life is. It's about being shaped. It's not being wrong, right, thrown out, that sort of thing. Jane,
what would I be praying? How would I be praying if I felt like, to the best of my ability, I know what it was like to abide in God?
Yes.
What would that
Beautiful.
be like?
Yeah, exactly. If we started from that premise, accepting that we're already connected to that vine and longing to kind of remain there and to accentuate that connection. But so often when we look at it, we start by feeling different or distant or separate. And that's what these metaphors invite us to start with. No, we're not different. God's already with us. We're connected to it. Are you connected to the vine? Jane, you just got up. I was going to call on you. I'll call on you again after Barbara.
I think it all comes back to love. And I think one of the hardest things to love is yourself. And unless you can love yourself, you really don't know what love of God is either,
Yeah.
because it's all tied to judgment.
Yes. The letter of 1 John really picks up on that. That's where that beautiful passage, God is love, and those who do not love do not know God. And it's that. And what is love? I mean, I know that's a big question, but a lot of it comes back to, in order to love anyone else, it has to start here. And when you look at sort of the stories of Jesus and the healing stories and the questions, throughout the Gospels, the 4 Gospels that we have, it's like 183 times that Jesus is approached with some sort of a question or demand or worry or concern or that sort of thing. And only 3 times does he ever give a direct response, a direct answer. Every other time, he sort of turns the concern or the question back on them, trusting them, knowing that the healing is not something that is waved over them like a magic wand, but there's a relationship. There's something that happens in them and their faith and their process, kind of getting into the mud there. And Jesus trusts them. And it's like he's sort of saying, that's really where the healing happens. Some of this, it's about working it out. together. It's not just about God or Jesus or anyone else doing it for you. Okay, there's that connection. And as Bonnie named, and as so many of you named, I feel that when we come at it with that larger perspective, it affords us a chance to look back at maybe those times that we sensed as abandonment, and maybe reevaluate and see some measure of perhaps empowerment that came through them. Jane, you're back. Did you want to say something too?
Things that Patty said and then Dan said just a bit ago just hit so profoundly, because Kurt and I are facing some endings, things that are ending. And it's been painful and hard. And I love to look at it. I want to look at it from the different perspective that you each provided of what might God have in store for us? You know, what is the future? We don't know that. And instead of staying stuck and angry about the endings, trying to be open to what's ahead, and that we are a work in progress. Our life is still being created and evolving, and be open to what new things might be coming our way as we try to accept, you know, these endings. And so thank you. It's helpful, very helpful.
Yeah, and that is, that's some of life's most meaningful and difficult work at times, to allow ourselves to open to the possibility, you know, of something beautiful coming through in the times of pain and struggle and loss and change. So, yeah, prayer can be a deep part of how we navigate those rough waters, but it really means something. It matters how we approach it, and the way we engage in prayer, I guess, is part of what we're seeing, and the evaluations and even the judgments, as some of you have said, about what we expect, you know, from prayer or from God, what we expect from ourselves, how we assess our life. You know, do we look at our lives as just a bunch of problems, you know, to be solved, or unfortunately for many of us, that have not ever been solved, or that have just remained. And so now we've sort of written them off, and even ourselves off. And of course, some of us have written God off. I'm not pointing any fingers at anyone. There's parts of us, and maybe some of us sitting in this group right now, that feel very much like that. And the struggle is, how do I find God again? There's not an easy answer. There's not an easy answer, but you're in good company. You're in good company for those that have longed for that sense of deeper connection, through prayer, through faith, through life, through meaning, through relationship, and through all the opposite, the brokenness within there. So I would only say that as we experience all that, and it throws us, you know, to lean in more intently, is what we're seeing, to lean in more intently, and to stay, you know, stay persistent in our prayer, and reassess, you know, some of the things and what we've been asking for, and how we've been doing it. And again, it's not to say that it's all about us, you know, but we have a role to play. Boyce?
I guess a lot of us that have been talking today have said about the same thing. But for me, I use the word control. Unanswered prayer says, Boyce, you're not in control. It's not your decision. And so I have tried to learn to give things to God and trust that whatever God brings, I can deal with. And I strongly believe in the saying, I used to have a thing in my office, and I would talk to students about it, parents, And it said, life is 10% what happens to you, but it's 90% of how you respond to it. And so bad things can happen, or you want somebody to be healed and they die, or some other thing. That's a negative, but it's how you can turn it into a more positive experience that makes your life more enriched. And so it's how you react to those things that happen to you that you don't have control over, that can keep you on the positive vein and keep you believing in and trusting in God. But I think that's really hard for us to just, it's like handing over all our decisions to our spouse. You know, we wouldn't want to do that. But in this case, we've got to do it with God. We've got to allow God to make the decision and allow whatever he throws, or whatever God throws at us, we need to then find a way to make it palatable, enjoyable, or positive for our lives.
Well, certainly releasing control is an important part. You know, life reminds us quite regularly of how little control we have. And it's funny how, if we're honest, in a lot of our prayer lives and a lot of approach with God is very much seeking control that we long for, that we wish we had, you know. And again, not trying to say, not judging that, valuing that, it is what it is. It's our humanity. And we are welcome to lift that up in prayer, if only to allow us to voice it so that it's not the only thing we think about, so that we can kind of move through some of this, because it's part of that. This is part of releasing the mess, the sense of control, the sense of responsibility that we have. And yes, giving that over to God, but while still accepting that we have a role to play. You know, it's not just about being robots and waiting for this perception of God to do something and then we go, but to just, hey, this is part of my grappling right now. This is where I am. This is what my faith and my prayer looks like right now. And still say that that's still prayer. When I felt my best and most connected to God, and my best meditation ever is the same prayer as when I, you know, screwed it up royally and it was the worst experience and everything fell flat and I don't know where God is, and all, you know, whatever you can think of it. There's a continuum here, but it's all prayer. It's all prayer, and staying connected in that relationship is kind of what we've been talking about in these first sessions. First, we're almost all the way through, but this now 5th session, it's really been a theme, is that it's about the relationship and not the magic wand waving. Was there another hand? Oh, Margaret? Yeah.
I have always been impatient. So when I pray to God, I expect an answer tomorrow. And I prayed and prayed when I was younger for help, and he didn't answer me. So I figured, well, I made my bed, and my father always said, you got to lie, you made it. So I figured that's my doom for life. But then God answered me when I was in the 30s. And I was amazed. And I changed with his help everything I've had since then. You couldn't convince me that God didn't have a hand in my life after that.
Right. And even when your prayers weren't answered initially, rather than saying, all right, forget this, I'm out, it sounds like you leaned in, as we've been sort of talking about, and continued to just even leave the door open a crack, whatever that looks like, but maintain the relationship, which then afforded you the sensitivity or the perceptiveness within your spirit to receive something in your 30s, as you named, down the road, to just be
It's
open to
amazing.
that possibility. It is amazing, but it's mutual, it's relational work that you were engaged in. It's that prayer on that long suffering, long continuing road. And just by continuing to pray in those types of moments is to remind us and is to teach us that prayer is not about push button, get result. It's not about that. Yeah. I mean, perhaps all of us treat it like that at times. There's no question, but yeah, that's what we're talking about. And I think, if we were to look at those passages, particularly the John passages, the Gospel of John and First John, the letter, that go into the abiding part, it sort of touches on, let me just call them up here. It touches on what we're talking about. They both talk, this idea of being connected to something greater than us, the vine or the community or something, the commandments. How do you find them to be instructive? We've talked about abiding, but what are they actually saying abiding kind of looks like, if we were to look at these two passages? Now I'm going to try to call them up here so that you can see the fullness. Yeah, I think that does it, if you're able to look at them, but you can choose either one. What as you look at them, what if anything do they reveal to you about what it means to abide, and how that might relate to this idea of what answered prayer and keeping company with God? And I know we've been talking about it, so don't feel like you need to reiterate if we've been like, yeah, I get this, I've got it. But if there's anything else that comes up for you, how are these passages? The vine one in particular is such a well-known one. And there's some language in there that people have often assessed as being, well, if you don't abide in me, then you're screwed. Mm-hmm. When that's not necessarily the case. When you look at this, it's not about this sense of judgment up there. If you get it wrong, you're thrown into the fire and burned. But perhaps when we approach our life as if we are separate from God ever, then it's hard to find the life. We start to wither. When we act like we are separated, eventually that separation can become an infection, or can be a part of our sense. And it can become life-threatening in that way. That's what I'm inviting you to look at and to think about. It's like, all right, how does this, and maybe that's something that you reflect on and bring next week, because I recognize there's a lot. But yeah, how does it open up this idea of what answered prayer might look like, and what's the point of all this, of this prayer? And I can't see hands if anyone's holding it up now. So
I was holding mine up.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Me
because
too.
of the way this
I
is.
am too.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sitting here talking and I'm only seeing a handful of you. I think I heard Marilyn, and then I heard one other. So please go ahead, Marilyn, and then I'm just leaving the scripture up so people can see it. Go ahead, please.
I was going to remind, I have said this before, and I think I exaggerate slightly. I don't think it was really 40 years, but I had a whole bunch of years where I wasn't engaged in any kind of spiritual practice or even thinking about what that might look like. And I did wither. I really did. And then became aware that this was something I really wanted to get back to.
Yeah.
And so two things occur to me that have become really important to me. One is to see myself on a path, my life on a path. And I'm not there all by myself. God is there with me. The people that I'm close to are there with me. And even now and then people pop in and out who aren't there very much. But at any rate, my life is on a path. And the second is that one of the things that I pray for that is very meaningful for me is to ask, what do I need to know that I'm not even thinking about? And then stay very open because that may be something that, you know, my intuition brings into my mind or that I see happening somewhere.
Yeah.
Or there are all kinds of ways that I can be shown what I need to know that I'm just not thinking about.
Yeah, that's a beautiful statement. And I think that's a very instructive one too. Personally, I really resonate with that idea of asking those types of questions that allow us to be broken open further, that the circles of our connection to ourselves, our world, and to God might ever widen like a ripple in water, and just keep it growing. You know, it doesn't have to be as big as the universe. No, it is what it is, but it just that it's growing and opening, and then that we might be ready. There's something there I find that's very just the central in keeping a relationship with God. There's not that type of question, as we've said, you know, if it's about continually breaking ourselves or getting outside of ourselves, some of you have used that language. That's a good question that helps that to happen. Thank you, Marilyn. And whoever else had their hand up.
It was me, Bonnie.
Yes, go ahead, Bonnie.
I'm glad that you put this up because especially the Vine passage, as you mentioned, is very familiar.
Yeah.
And I wanted you to do, to discuss a little bit or give me your definition of what bearing fruit means, because that's a phrase that has been used in with a particular definition to mean one thing. And I have a feeling that there's other interpretations, and I'd like to hear what your interpretation is of that.
Yeah, well, let's hear. Okay, I'm going to turn this off. Let's say that, yeah. So if you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. I'm going to get back to looking at everyone. That is a passage that a lot of us have heard lots of different things about. What are some of the ways that you've been even told? If you want to start with that, Bonnie, and anyone else, what have you been told that it means?
Well, most of you know that I grew up in an evangelical church and have an evangelical background. And so bearing fruit was you witness to other people, you know, quote unquote, bring other people to Christ. They become Christians. You're bearing fruit. You're multiplying. And that's how it was always interpreted. And I have a feeling that there's other ways that can be looked at. I've been having some interesting experiences recently with getting in touch with friends from high school and so forth that are still very much, you know, have gone along this path their entire life. And we're talking about evolving. I'm like, boy, has my life taken different turns than theirs. And I'm at a completely different place now.
Yes.
And so I just, I'd like to hear other ways of interpreting that besides how I've always been told. And maybe that's the right way, but I'm sure that there's other viewpoints.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Maybe it's a helpful way, but when we're talking about metaphor, you know, I think to say that there's the right way is one of those that there's a reason why they didn't just say it in very on the nose language. You know, there's a reason why they use these powerful storytelling tools. But yeah, that's one that's a very that many people have heard in terms of this this story. I saw Patty's hand up. Did you have another perspective on it?
I was thinking about what Marilyn said in terms of we're on a path. And I was thinking about what a dark night is and how we grow through our dark nights. Paul grew through his blindness. He changed. He became not attached to where he was before and became attached to a different life. And one of the things I think about is that Christ said that I've come that you may be fully human. So I see us as growing into our full humanness, which if we do that, when we do that, or as we do that, we become less attached and more curious and more full of wonder for this God that is here, that whose answer is sometimes a dark night, so that we can have that part thrown away and burned, and open us up to the fullness of love. And I think of what you said, Bonnie, that the people are having this verbal evangelism, but I think of people like Howard Thurman, who influenced Martin Luther King, and he didn't do it by preaching. He did it by living a life that was totally great. I mean, totally given over to a kind of wonder. If you read his work, it's so amazing. And other people like that, even St. Francis, who threw off all his clothes in the middle of his father's court and said, I don't want any of this. I'm over here now. And so we're not being burned up. It's not us. It's all the stuff that we don't need. And how grateful can we be for that, even when we can't be grateful because we think we know better. So that's how I see it. That when I look at my life, I see it as just evolving, and it's been painful at times, but the pain is probably all of us. But the other piece I think is that I can't do it without all of you. I can't see without all of you. I have to see where you struggle so I can see where I am. There's no way for me to be in Christ without you, without all of you. That's why this is so extraordinarily amazing. That's all I have to say.
Amen. Amen. The health of any vine is not about my little piece producing. It's just not how it works. The health and the production of a vine is when the vine is healthy as a whole, and that there's a deep connection and a sense of connection. No one produces fruit outside of all of us producing fruit when we're part of a vine. So I think that to me is highly resonant as well. And that's a different approach, because I do think there's a bit of an individualistic quality that can come out of this, some interpretations of this passage, as if it's my job to bear fruit. Well, no, not at all. If we're abiding in the vine, it is a deep sense of connection within community, and within that love and the strength of that love and that wholeness, that's where the fruit is born. That's a totally different approach. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on that one? It's these passages, when they talk about abiding, they really are moving us into that sense of what is it, what within our practices can continually draw us into ever deeper relationship, connection with God and with each other. That is what deepens our prayer life. Yes, we have a role to play. Yes, it matters what our tact is, perhaps, or how we engage some of this stuff. That's what a relationship means. It's not just a one-way street. Okay, we don't just set up the right conditions and then, okay, come at me. No, it's different than that. And that's what we've been obviously talking a lot about. But as we strengthen and break out of our patterns and perspectives and broaden, that's what enables us to tune in a little better, to start to hear a little better, or to perceive a little differently. And it gives us a chance to find deeper alignment in our prayers and in our living with this Spirit of God that is ever present, but often missed, because of whether, as we've said, our will, our own sense of control, our own sense of despair at not getting results or hearing what we wanted to, that sort of thing. So these passages invite us to stay connected through all things. That's where our health is. Stay connected. Not easy. Because a lot of us reach that point where we just are like, arms up in the air, and we feel done, and he's saying that's real, that happens to everybody. But when it happens, don't fall into the lie that you really are separated, because that's where the withering will happen. And as Margaret said, in some ways we can make that bed and then lie in it. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy at times. And as we go through all of this, there's no question that doing prayer, a prayer life in any capacity, is a struggle. It's a struggle. But here's the other thing I know. It's It's also a struggle to forgive someone who's wronged you. It's a struggle to love your neighbor. It's a struggle to help out someone who's needy in your midst. Okay. It's all about struggle. It's okay. And yet we persist. We persist in our prayer, hopefully, because Jesus lived that way and even instructed us, always pray and never give up. Those wonderful little stories about the woman that kept knocking, those kind of stories. They talk about persistence a lot. And I want to leave you with this sort of, call it homework. Maybe we can spend a minute or two reflecting on it now, but I know that some of my questions in this kind of topic can go, they're bigger, but, when we think about the things that we do that we're persistent about, okay. When we really want to do something, we strive and we do it. So sometimes it's a physical goal, whether athletic or just something physical, losing weight, something. We set our mind about it and we get it done and we stay persistent. Or it also might be getting those darn woodpeckers off of our roof. We get really persistent about that. Or maybe it was just getting that, calling the cable company and finally getting them to install the right underground cabling that allows me to get Wi-Fi to my house. Whatever it is, there are certain things in our lives that we are darn persistent about, doggedly so, and we will make happen. And the question is, that the take home is this whatever it takes attitude. How do we show that spirit, or do we show that spirit in our prayer? That type of persistence, that type of leaning in, even when we've maybe felt an initial no or distance or feeling lost or hurt. Do we show persistence in our prayer? To what extent do we even value persistence in our prayer, or sacrifice, a sense of sacrifice in our prayer? That we know we haven't gotten what we want, but we pray anyway, because it's not about buttons and results. It's about relationship. How closely aligned with God's perspective are you feeling in your prayer practice right now? We've been talking about this. How do we break ourselves open? Assess, look, how closely aligned do you feel? And that helps then to see clearly, and then to maybe continue to open it up. That series of questions is in number 4 in the notes, which I will post today on the church website. But if you'd like me to repeat anything for the sake of people that like to take notes and start thinking immediately, that's fine. We also have readings for our final session, which I can name, or you can just get from does everyone have the schedule that I sent out originally? Okay. Does anyone, those questions, whatever, did any initial sort of things that came to your awareness, as you heard those questions, or that reflection on the idea of persistence and what we get persistent about, and how does prayer fit in? It's good to chew on this stuff, friends. And it's important to allow it to sink in, because it'll come up in different ways. Peter.
Running through my head during this discussion has been this saying from some old movie I saw, or maybe it wasn't, but as God is my witness is what I'm thinking of. And the idea of the witness or the observer has come to play a big part in my life. In that I am interested in what I am thinking about consciously. And so when I find myself in judgment or resisting or wanting to control, the witness makes that clear to me. The witness is, we can get several people here are probably more expert in psychology than I am. But the witness lets me know whether it's my ego speaking or whether it's a larger part of me that includes everything and everyone. The holistic side, which I think is the side that Jesus taught us to reside in and abide in. So when you ask, how does prayer enter in my life? I am one who really believes in thy will be done. And so what I'm into allowing what life brings and not being judgmental about it. I must say, maybe I haven't suffered as much as many people. That's quite possible. But I'm still of the belief that I don't know much about God, but I know God is life itself. And I know God is love, and God is forgiveness, and God is mercy, and God is patience. And so the witness keeps me on track to not act or speak out or judge too quickly, but to find the beauty in what is. And I think, I guess that's what I wanted to say.
Beautiful comments, Pete. Thank you. That is a very profound, it's a profound image, the one of witness, and sort of a non-judgmental advocate, one who is there with us, for us, not over and against us, that idea. And what I love about images like that, and I invite any of you to continue to think about, what are the images that, what is God for you? And not only, but a witness is a beautiful image. And as we find these images, what I also notice that the degree that we incorporate them into our prayer and our sense of connection with God is often resonant with how we live in the world and the types of relationships we cultivate. And to find witness with God is to learn to be witness with one another, and to find and cultivate those groups, be it a prayer group like this, or the Kingsmen, or or other individual friendships, that then you learn what it looks like to be that with others, because we're cultivating it, we're working with it, we're playing with it. That's what I'm inviting you to. I mean, that's really what each homework assignment has been, is to invite yourself to get in there and play in the mud of your soul and see what stirs up some wonderful growth of seedlings, right in front of you, that maybe you'd never known before. Because sometimes when we don't till the soil, it gets a little stuck. We all find that sometimes. But so beautiful comments, everyone. As we're getting ready to wrap up, I don't want to cut anyone off if there was anyone else that wanted to say something as we're kind of reaching this closing point. But I'm always just thankful of wherever this conversation takes us along a path, and the path goes like this, and we stop over here, and then we're going over there. But yeah, we're on this path, and I hope that today provided some places of comfort and instruction, and perhaps challenge, and cracking open. And if you find yourselves thinking, as I know how things can come up, you always feel free to reach out to me if you want to call or to text or something. I'd love to follow up. I know it's not always easy to cover all the bases in this context, but just wanted to put that out there for folks. But thank you for being here. And our next session will be the final session of this study we've been doing. And for next week, it's 4 readings, Psalm 143, 8 and 10, Matthew 6, 9 to 13, Acts 2, 33 to 35, and then James 2, 15 to 17. And I say that largely for the benefit of anyone who might be watching this that didn't get a schedule. So anyway, friends, thank you very much for your hearts and your faith and your questions and all of you and what you bring to this class. It makes it so rich. And look forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.